Greetings, my embers, and happy All Hallows Eve. The story I'll be bringing you was written especially for the channel. This story's title is The Trick-or-Treat Killer, written exclusively by Creepy Clown Girl and the Sleeping Wendigo. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Ballard is a quaint and quiet small suburbia town in Kentucky, where family and tradition runs deep and people felt safe enough to leave the doors unlocked. But all that would change one Halloween night with a string of brutal murders that would shake the small town to its very core. Leonard Elroy Harvey was born on March 6, 1959, the only child of Elroy and Martha Harvey. He grew up in Cottonwood Falls, Kansas, and pretty much was a loner and didn't get along with too many people. Some say he gave them the creeps and made them feel uncomfortable anytime he was around, so pretty much everyone stayed away from him. It's Halloween 1979 in the small town of Cottonwood Falls, Kansas, and the kids are excited about going trick-or-treating and having fun. A lot of houses were decorated with Halloween decorations, while others just had a lit jack-o'-lantern sitting on their porch. Little did any of the residents, the Bakers, or the Johnsons know that, for 8 years, Leonard kept his rage hidden, waiting for the right night to teach people a lesson. Earlier that evening, Leonard watched as the Bakers left to go out to dinner. While they were gone, he broke in through a basement window. He made his way upstairs and hid in the closet of the parents' bedroom. After a few hours passed, he could hear the family returning home. Mr. Baker sneaks up on his wife, Becky, who is in the kitchen baking cookies. She screams, turns around, and smacks him on the arm with the pot holder as she says,
"Damn it, Carl! Don't do that. You know how I feel about it."
Laughing, he kisses his wife, grabs a cookie, and says, "Hey, do you know where the clown mask for my costume is?" Becky then says,
I swear, sometimes you're worse than the kids. Finish getting ready and take them out for the evening. Your mask should have been with your costume in our bedroom closet. Isn't it there?
No, but I'll go check again. And the cookies are good, he says as he walks away. As Carl gets upstairs, he peeks in the kid's bedroom and says, "All right, kiddos. Are y'all both almost ready for trick-or-treating? We're leaving in a minute."
Yeah, Daddy, we're ready, but are you?
Both children replied. "Yeah, almost. I just have to go get my mask. Meet me downstairs."
Okay.
The kid said, excitedly, as they grabbed their pillowcases and headed downstairs. As Carl went into his bedroom closet to look for his mask, he was knocked unconscious. Leonard quickly undressed him, tied him up, and got into Carl's costume to take the children trick-or-treating.
Yay, here comes Daddy!
The children said excitedly as they ran up and grabbed his hands and went outside. As Leonard shut the door behind them, he hears Becky say,
Have fun and be safe.
After a few hours, Leonard brings the children home. They run upstairs, closing the door behind them. They get out of their costumes and begin looking through their candy. Meanwhile, Leonard sneaks into the kitchen where he sees Mrs. Baker standing at the sink, washing dishes.
"How was trick-or-treating?"
she says, hearing all the commotion. "It has me starving." He maniacally laughed as he knocked her out with his fist. He then ties her to one of the dining room chairs and heads upstairs. Quietly sneaking past the children's room, he gathers Carl and drags him downstairs, tying him to the chair next to his wife. Once he was done, he crept upstairs to the children's room and opened the door.
Hey, Daddy, wanna come see what kind of candy we got?
the children say, not looking up at first until Leonard shuts and locks the door behind him. That's when they look up in horror, realizing the man standing before them isn't their daddy. Now completely paralyzed with fear, they listened as he began singing. Trick or treat, give me something good to eat. Trick or treat, I see something good to eat. His voice trailed off, muffled by the blood-curdling screams of the children. Their parents sat in terror as they listened to the dying moans of their children as they both sat gagged and bound to their chairs. After a few moments of silence, the parents could hear the children's doors slowly creaking open. Walking downstairs, returning to the kitchen, Mr. and Mrs. Baker looked up and saw Leonard standing before them. With tears in their eyes and shock on their faces, they noticed he was covered in blood, carrying a trick-or-treat bucket containing a mysterious substance. With a sinister grin on his blood-stained face, he turns around to the stove, grabs the skillet, and sickly drops the blood-drenched item inside. He gazed towards the parents and licked his lips. They could smell the nauseating stench of a mysterious meat sizzling. Singing to himself, they watched on, gagging as he dipped his finger into the bucket and wrote a phrase on the wall. Trick or treat, give me something good to eat. Trick or treat, I see something good to eat. Trick or treat, I smell something good to eat. Trick or treat, I ate something good for me. Moments later, Leonard places a plate on the table as he licks and slurps his bloody fingers. Horrified, Mr. and Mrs. Baker shriek as they watch Leonard cut into the charred and tender lumps of meat. After cutting the meat, Leonard looks at the parents and growls, I'm going to remove the tape from your mouths. If either one of you screams, I'll kill you both. Petrified, the Bakers flinched as they felt the tape ripped from their flesh. Coughing through her tears, Becky asks, Why are you doing this to us? Leonard laughs and whispers to them both. How easily you've both forgotten. What? You don't remember what happened 8 years ago? Forcibly grabbing Becky's face, Leonard stabs a piece of meat and shoves it in her mouth. You will eat it or you will die! He yells. Covering her mouth with his bloody hand, he forces her to chew as she gags, vomits, and swallows. Watching this torture happen to his wife, Carl screams, You're a sick and twisted bastard! Letting go of Becky, Leonard snaps. Oh, am I now? Let me show you just how truly twisted I can be. Pulling Carl's head back, Leonard grabs the last chunk of meat and crams it down his throat, snarling, I hope you both have enjoyed your little treats tonight. Letting out a sick and sinister laugh, he slides the knife across Mr. Baker's throat, cutting him from ear to ear. Watching what is happening, Becky lets out an ear-piercing scream that Leonard knows will draw unwanted attention to the house. He quickly leaves out of the back door and disappears. After leaving the Baker's home, Leonard quietly makes his way back home. After about an hour of getting cleaned up, he leaves his house and walks to the Johnsons' home, where they too would unknowingly meet the same fate as the Bakers. The next day, the small town of Cottonwood Falls would know the fate of the two families who were brutally murdered in their own homes. It wouldn't be until the following morning when the neighbors of both families would come across a horrific scene that would forever change their sense of security. As the police arrived at both murder locations, passerbys would see a scene that eerily mirrored another one a couple blocks away. The police and a gathering crowd of neighbors watched as the paramedics loaded Mrs. Baker and Mrs. Johnson into the back of two ambulances as they were both taken to the hospital for observation. Meanwhile, the police began processing both scenes, but it would be in the Baker's home that an officer would go into the kitchen and discovered a skillet containing the remnants of a partially cooked and eaten liver of unknown origins. Out of the corner of his eye, he happened to look up and notice something written in what appears to be in blood. He noticed the words read, "Trick or treat, give me something good to eat. Trick or treat, I see something good to eat. Trick or treat, I smell something good to eat. Trick or treat, I ate something good for me." After seeing and reading the message in blood, the officer covers his mouth and immediately runs outside to vomit. Upon seeing this, his partner runs up to him to check on him. In between the heaving, the officer chokes out, "I think that bastard ate those children's livers." After visiting both Mrs. Baker and Mrs. Johnson at the hospital, both ladies gave a description of the killer. Based on their descriptions, the police quickly realized that they were looking for Leonard Elroy Harvey. They quickly moved to the Harveys' home and arrested Leonard for the murders. During the trial, Leonard was found guilty of all charges and was sentenced to death. He would await his execution in a maximum security mental institution for the criminally insane. It's now 5 years later, 1 week before Halloween of 1984, and Leonard Elroy Harvey is being transported to the main part of the prison to be executed for his crimes that took place in 1979. Taking every precaution, the warden and 4 of his guards did everything they could to make sure that Leonard was secure enough for transport. After getting Leonard and 3 other inmates secured in the prison van, the warden and 3 of his guards, heavily armed, get in the vehicle as well. During the short commute to Leonard's location of execution, the transport van has a blowout, causing the driver to lose control, resulting in the van flipping several times. Dazed and confused, Leonard noticed a guard laying next to him. Removing the keys from the guard's belt, he quickly freed himself from his restraints. Grabbing a gun, Leonard exits the van. Looking around, he notices a food delivery truck parked behind the commissary. Quickly making his way to the truck, Leonard tries the door, discovering it's unlocked. He hastily hops in the back to discover boxes that he quickly hides behind. Moments later, Leonard hears the motor turn over and the vehicle begins to sway. After some time, the delivery truck makes its way back to the warehouse. Stopping out front, the driver gets out. 10 minutes later, Leonard exits the truck and takes off. After walking for some time, Leonard stumbles upon a vehicle left running, parked at a convenience store. Noticing that the owner of the vehicle was inside, Leonard hijacks the car. After almost 12 hours of driving, Leonard found himself in the small town of Ballard, Kentucky, and on an empty tank. As the car begins to sputter, he notices a rickety barn off in an empty field and quickly hides the car before it dies. After pulling in and parking, Leonard sat there while drinking water and thought about what he'd do next. Getting out of the car, Leonard started looking around and discovered an old bale of hay, along with an old blanket. Yes, this will work for now, he thought to himself. Noticing that it was getting dark, his stomach reminded him that he hadn't eaten anything in almost 2 days. Leaving the barn, Leonard decided to head back towards town to stock up on food and supplies. After walking about half an hour, Leonard gets to town and immediately notices the houses were decorated for Halloween. Out of the corner of his eye, as he was walking along, Leonard noticed a man standing outside of a house. Stopping and turning around, he recognized him as one of the bullies from high school. Noticing his face, this triggers a flashback from when he was 12 years old. It's Halloween 1971, and Leonard's parents have decided that he is now old enough to go trick-or-treating alone. After getting dressed in his costume and grabbing his pillowcase, he steps out into the cool night air and begins his door-to-door collection of candy. After a couple of hours of trick-or-treating, Leonard begins walking across the school's football field. Off in the distance, he sees the group of boys that have always bullied him throughout his school years. Frightened, with nowhere to run or hide, Leonard takes off running and notices the boys are giving chase. Suddenly, he feels a pushing force from behind, causing him to fall face first into the cold, wet, hard ground. As he rolls over, he sees Coach Baker and Principal Johnson walking by with their families. He screams out, "Please, help me! Please!" Observing what's taking place, they all continue walking, thinking that it's just kids being kids. After noticing the adults were gone, the boys snatched Leonard's pillowcase and began kicking and punching him over and over until he could not breathe. Laughing and taunting him, the boys dragged his body through the mud until they reached the goalpost, in which they decided to tie him to it. Sitting there cold, bloody, bruised, wet, and alone, he began the struggle of untying himself. Leonard could feel himself becoming enraged with the thought of being abandoned by Mr. Baker and Mr. Johnson. At that moment, Leonard swore to himself that he would get revenge on both of their families. As he groaned and whimpered in pain as he stood up, he began slowly making his way back home to begin plotting his revenge. Just then, headlights of a passing vehicle snaps Leonard out of his flashback, causing him to quickly duck behind a bush. Once the coast was clear, he continued on to town to search for food and supplies. Seeing a store, he silently breaks in and steals what he needs and flees back to the barn. After making his way back, Leonard dumps out his backpack of stolen goods. Using the matches, he gathered some wood and built a fire to cook himself something to eat. As he's eating, he remembers the bully that he saw in town and starts getting angry. Stabbing his fork into the ground, he growls, "It's almost Halloween, and I've got a trick and a treat for you and your family." On behalf of Creepy Clown Girl and the Sleeping Wendigo, they would like you all to know this is not the end of this twisted tale. Please stay tuned for part 2 of this sickening madness, coming October 2023. With that being said, have a very creepy and horrific Halloween. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, everyone. Ha 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 ha!